Once upon a soft morning, when the clouds floated like feather pillows and the sun warmed the rooftops as kindly as a hand on a sleepy brow, two children woke in a little cottage at the edge of a great green forest. Their names were Hansel and Gretel. Their cottage was made of warm brown wood and had window frames painted the color of cornflowers. Vines curled up the walls as if they were climbing to see the view, and a small garden stretched along the path, filled with parsley, thyme, and a cheerful crowd of marigolds that lifted their bright faces to the light. When the wind visited, the marigolds nodded yes, 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 as if they agreed with every good idea. Inside, the cottage smelled like fresh bread and pine. The kettle hummed on the hearth, the clock ticked with the lazy patience of a cat, and the table beside the round window waited with 3 bowls and 2 little wooden mugs. Hansel's mug had a nick on the rim shaped like a crescent moon. Gretel's had a tiny painted strawberry that made her smile each time she lifted it. Mother moved about the kitchen like a quiet song, stirring porridge, slicing apples, tasting the steam with her smile. Father came in from the early woodpile with a whisper of sawdust on his sleeves and the happy squeak of boots that had spoken to grass. He kissed Mother's cheek and ruffled Hansel's hair and tucked a wayward curl behind Gretel's ear, all in one sweep, as if his arms were made for gathering everyone in. "Good morning, nestlings," he said, because that was what he called them when he felt especially glad. "Good morning," sang Hansel, whose voice was shaped like laughter even when he wasn't laughing yet. "Good morning," chimed Gretel, whose words always sounded as if their edges were dipped in honey. They ate together by the window, watching the day stretch itself into shape. Mother poured warm milk. Father told a little story about a fox who had discovered he liked blueberries. Hansel counted how many clouds looked like ships, 3, and Gretel counted how many looked like sheep, also 3, so it felt fair. When the porridge bowls were empty and the apples were only sweet memories, Mother dried her hands on her apron and looked toward the gentle green line where the woods began. "We'll need a basket of berries and a handful of herbs for supper," she said. "The forest is in a generous mood." Gretel's eyes brightened. She loved the forest's soft footpaths and the way sunlight made ladders between the leaves. Hansel's smile widened. He liked the forest's small surprises, a beetle like a moving bead, a feather left like a bookmark in the grass, the hop-skitter-hop of a squirrel with secrets. "Go together," Father said, tying a red ribbon to the handle of the willow basket. The ribbon made the basket look as if it, too, was ready for adventure. "Stay on the path, and listen to the forest. It knows the way there and back." Mother tucked 2 slices of fresh bread into the basket and a cloth to keep the berries neat. "And wear your light cloaks," she added, smoothing Gretel's collar, patting Hansel's shoulders. "Even kind shadows can be cool." They stepped out into the day. The cottage door closed with a quiet click that sounded content, and the marigolds nodded their approval once more. The forest did not begin all at once. First came the meadow, dotted with clover and tiny white flowers that looked like fallen stars, and then the fringe where birches kept their pale sleeves rolled up, and only after that the deeper green where pines stood calm as guardians. Hansel and Gretel knew the forest well. It was a friend who changed its hat often, sun hat, cloud cap, crown of wind. They walked side by side. Hansel held the basket, Gretel held a small tin bell she liked to ring once at the beginning of every walk, so the day would recognize them. "Ting," the bell said, not loudly, just like a hello whispered under a smile. "Good morning, path," said Gretel, because she talked to paths. "Good morning, trees," said Hansel, because he talked to trees. The path answered by being extra springy. The trees answered by mixing their needles and leaves into a sound like distant rain, even though the sky was blue. Sunlight fell in golden rectangles across the moss, and the children stepped from one to the next as if they were warm stepping stones. A robin hopped ahead, looking over its shoulder now and then as though guiding them on a tour. A dragonfly stitched the air with quick bright thread. Somewhere a brook practiced its shhh, 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 as if it were a librarian for water. Gretel stopped at the first bramble of blackberries. She chose the ones that were the color of midnight and the shape of a happy thumb. Hansel held out the basket and let each berry land with a small velvet whisper. They worked carefully, leaving plenty for the birds. Gretel always said picking berries felt like stringing pearls for the forest to wear. Between brambles, Gretel collected thoughts like seashells. When the wind goes through pine needles, she said, it sounds like they are telling each other secrets. Hansel listened. And when we walk on old leaves, they sound like the secrets trying to answer. The forest approved of this conversation. It dropped a feather at their feet, soft gray with a stripe of white. Gretel tucked it behind her ear. It looked exactly right there, like a small quiet wing. Hansel reached into the basket for a slice of bread. He took a small nibble and then blinked, struck by a careful idea. Let's leave crumb hellos for the path, he said. So it knows we'll come this way again. Gretel loved the idea at once. Crumbs that say thank you and we'll be back before supper, both at the same time. So now and then, where the moss was thick or the roots made a little shelf, Hansel crumbled a pinch of bread. A beetle found one and paused like a surprised jewel. A sparrow tilted its head in polite interest. The crumbs looked cheerful, like tiny suns taking a nap. They were not worried about forgetting the way. Father had taught them how the path curves with the land and how the sun makes a moving map on the ground. But it pleased them to imagine the forest reading their trail the way Mother read a recipe, slowly, with patience and a happy. Beyond the brambles, the air tasted minty. Gretel followed the scent to a low green patch and touched a leaf between her fingers. Peppermint, she declared, and the leaf gave the faintest nod. Mother would turn it into tea that tasted like cool shadows with a smile in them. They found thyme with tiny flowers that bees had kissed. They found a fern that curled at the end like a question mark, what else will the day bring? They found toadstools arranged like a family council, tall, medium, small. Hansel bowed to them as if they were elders. Gretel giggled and did the same. The forest offered small lessons the way a kind teacher offers pencils. If you step slowly on roots, they help your feet learn balance. If you listen long enough, birds will tell you when the wind changes its mind. If you kneel to see a flower up close, you'll find the sky is reflected in even the tiniest petal. Hansel and Gretel learned them gladly. They liked how learning made their hearts feel bigger without making their heads feel. Sometime after the sun had climbed a good stretch of sky, the path widened into a clearing that always felt like a living room with the ceiling lifted off. Wildflowers covered the meadow in confetti colors, yellow like butter, blue like a whisper, pink like the inside of a seashell. In the middle stood a stump as smooth as a stool. It remembered axe and rain and summers and snow, and it was happy to remember rest as well, when children sat upon it. They did. Hansel set down the basket and perched. Gretel swung her legs and counted butterflies by twos. The wind made the grasses bow gently, and every bough seemed to say, "Welcome, welcome." Hansel shared the last corner of his bread with Gretel and broke the very last corner into even tinier pieces for any beetle or ant who wished to attend their picnic. "Do you think the forest knows our names?" Gretel asked. "Yes," Hansel said at once. "It remembers the sound our steps make. Mine go pat pat, pat pat, and yours go pat, pause, like a song thinking about its next line." Gretel smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The stump felt warm. The sky felt wide. The meadow felt as safe as Mother's lap. They could have stayed there until the stars yawned awake. But the day had tucked one more kindness into its pocket, and it was ready to give it. It arrived on the air so gently that at first they thought it was only a memory, a hint of cinnamon, a tickle of sugar, the cozy echo of baking. Hansel lifted his head. Gretel lifted her nose. "Do you smell it?" she asked, already knowing he did. "Like cookies someone is telling a story about," Hansel said. The scent was faint and playful, now here, now gone, like a ribbon slipping through fingers. It drifted from beyond the far edge of the clearing, where the birches made a pale, friendly fence. "Let's see," Gretel whispered, standing with the careful excitement of someone rising not to shout but to listen better. Hansel gathered the basket, the ribbon on the handle fluttered yes, yes, yes. They followed the sweet trail the way one follows a song carried by wind. The path narrowed and then widened again, as if whispering, "This way, and take your time." Sunlight winked between leaves. Somewhere, the brook practiced a slightly different shhh, the kind it used when it wanted you to notice that you were getting closer to something you would like. The scent grew kinder, warmer, honey and spice and the soft golden happiness of ovens. Hansel and Gretel reached for each other's hands without thinking, the way you do when a new room opens in the house of the day and you want to enter together. They stepped through a little arch of branches, and the forest let the surprise be seen. It stood in a pocket of sun, as if the trees had saved the very best light for this exact place. A cottage, small, neat, inviting, whose roof shingles shone like caramel when the light kissed them, whose shutters wore the sweet color of sugared almonds, whose path was paved with tidy stones that looked suspiciously like cookies if cookies had decided to grow up and become helpful. They paused, still as fawns. The scent was no longer a whisper but a welcome. Vanilla, cinnamon, a sugar sigh, a curl of warm butter. And though the cottage looked as if it had leapt out of a kind dream and decided to stay, it did not look tricky or sly. It looked friendly. As if it were meant to be discovered exactly by those who walked with careful feet and wide open hearts. Gretel squeezed Hansel's hand. Hansel squeezed back. "Do we knock?" Gretel asked, because she was always polite even to houses. "We knock," Hansel nodded, because father said every door is a promise and a question. They took a single step forward. The marigold yellow light along the path brightened, just a little, as if to say, "Yes, children. Yes." And the forest, which always knew the next part of the story, grew extra quiet, not the hush of worry, but the hush of listening, the way a room listens when someone is about to tell you your favorite part. Underscore 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 underscore. If you'd like, I'll continue with installment 2 next. Hansel and Gretel meet the sweet cottage properly, explore its cozy rooms, and learn that its keeper is gentle and kind, with lessons as warm as cookies fresh from the oven. Hansel and Gretel stood hand in hand at the edge of the clearing. The air was full of scents so sweet that even the bees hummed a little softer, as though they had nothing more to add. The children gazed at the cottage with wide eyes, hardly believing what they saw. The roof was golden brown, shingled in pieces that looked like biscuits, each one dusted with sugar that sparkled like frost. The shutters on the windows were the pink of candied almonds, their surfaces so smooth they seemed to glow. The chimney gave off a ribbon of smoke that smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and something warm like ginger. And the path, oh, the path was made of stones that looked exactly like cookies. Round, crisp, set neatly one after another, leading straight to the front door as though inviting the children inside. Hansel bent carefully, touched one stone, and lifted his finger to his lips. A tiny sweetness lingered there. "It really is," he whispered. "It's made of sugar." Gretel giggled softly. She touched the window frame and her fingertip came away sticky with a drop of honey glaze. Who could have built such a place, she wondered aloud. The cottage didn't answer, but it seemed to breathe with warmth, the way their own cottage did when bread baked inside. It looked less like a trick and more like a dream someone had left in the world by accident. Hansel broke off the smallest crumb from the edge of a windowsill. He tasted it. His eyes went wide. "Gingerbread," he murmured. "Spiced, sweet, and soft." Gretel leaned closer, pinched a corner of frosting that decorated the shutters. She tasted carefully. Her lips curved into a smile. "Sugar and cream," she said. "Like Mother makes on holidays." They laughed together, quiet little laughs, the kind that spill out when you're both amazed and a little shy at once. Still, they remembered their manners. Gretel brushed her dress and said, "We should knock. This house belongs to someone, even if it looks like a dream." Hansel nodded firmly. "Father says every door deserves respect." Together, they climbed the cookie path, their shoes making faint crunch sounds with every step. The closer they came, the warmer the air smelled, until it was like standing inside a bakery at dawn. Hansel raised his hand and knocked gently on the door. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft, like knocking on a loaf of bread to see if it's baked through. At first, there was no reply. Only the hush of the forest and the distant song of a dove. Then, from within, came a voice. Not sharp, not harsh, but creaky, like a rocking chair moving in time with a lullaby. Come in, little ones. The latch is open. Hansel and Gretel exchanged glances. Gretel's eyes asked, should we? Hansel's eyes answered, together. They pushed the door slowly, and it swung inward with a sigh, as though it had been waiting for them all. The cottage's inside was even more wonderful than the outside. The walls were paneled with gingerbread, lined with patterns of sugar icing that curved like vines. Shelves held jars of sweets, glimmering rock candy, soft caramels, sugar-dusted almonds, dried fruits rolled in honey. The table in the center bore a checkered cloth and 3 chairs, their cushions stuffed with something so plump they looked like sugared buns. And the air, oh, the air was warm with scents of vanilla, nutmeg, and cocoa, wrapping around the children like a quilt. At the far side of the room, near the fire, sat an old woman. Her hair was as white as sifted flour. Her eyes twinkled like sugar crystals catching the light. She wore a gown the color of faded raspberries, and her hands rested gently in her lap. She smiled, not with trickery, but with the kindness of someone glad to see guests. Well, well, she said softly. 2 children with eyes as bright as stars. Come in, sit, and rest your feet. You must be tired from walking the forest. Hansel and Gretel stepped inside. Gretel curtsied politely. Hansel bowed as father had taught him. The woman nodded in approval. Polite children, she murmured. Polite children are always welcome here. She stood slowly, her joints creaking like the wood of the old cottage floor, and shuffled to the cupboard. From it, she drew a tray with cups and a pot. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the scent of cocoa and cinnamon. Drink, she said, pouring the warm liquid into the cups. It will put sunshine back into your steps. Hansel accepted his cup with both hands. Gretel did the same. They sipped carefully, and warmth spread through them, not just in their stomachs, but in their hearts, as though the cocoa had reached every corner of them. The woman chuckled softly at their smiles. Yes, she said. It is good to taste sweetness after walking long. As they sat, the fire in the hearth crackled softly, its flames like golden tongues licking the wood. The light flickered across the sugar-lined walls, making the whole cottage glow. Hansel leaned back in his chair. Gretel swung her legs gently, humming under her breath. The old woman listened, nodding to the tune, her eyes half closing in peace. It was not frightening. It was not dark. It was only warmth, rest, and the sense that the forest had guided them here for this very moment, a place to pause, to breathe, to be safe. The cocoa warmed Hansel and Gretel from head to toe. Their eyelids fluttered, but the old woman's twinkling eyes invited them to stay awake just a little longer, to enjoy the cottage and all its wonders. She set the empty cups aside and clapped her hands gently. Well, little ones, no guest should sit idle while there is bread to be baked. Come, come. Let the kitchen teach you its songs. Hansel and Gretel followed her to the wide wooden table, its surface dusted with flour as fine as snow. Bowls of sugar crystals gleamed like jars of captured starlight. Pots of cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger stood ready like small storytellers waiting to. The old woman scooped a mound of flour into a bowl. Flour is quiet, she said. It waits, patient and still. But give it water and love, and it becomes something new. She poured water, added a pinch of salt, and let the children stir. Hansel plunged his hands into the soft mixture, laughing as it clung to his fingers. Gretel kneaded carefully, pressing and folding as though tucking a blanket around a sleeping kitten. Bread teaches patience, the woman explained. You cannot rush it. It must rise in its own time. Hansel looked at the dough, at its small bubbles of breath. "Like us," he said softly. "We need time to grow." The old woman's smile deepened. "Yes, child. Exactly." Next she brought out a small jar of honey. Its golden light shone in the fire's glow, bright and warm. She dipped a spoon and let it fall in slow ribbons across the dough. "Honey is kindness," she said. "A little drop makes everything sweeter. Even the plainest bread." Gretel touched the sticky spoon with her finger, then licked it thoughtfully. "Like when Father ruffles our hair," she said. "Or when Mother sings while she stirs the soup." The old woman nodded. "Yes, my dear. That is honey for the heart." She reached for the jars of cinnamon and ginger. Their scents lifted into the air, sharp but cozy, like laughter on a cold day. "Spices are courage," the woman told them. "They are small, but they make themselves known. They remind us not to be afraid to shine." Hansel sniffed the cinnamon, his nose wrinkling with delight. "Like when we speak up at supper, even if we are shy," he said. "Like when we follow the path deeper into the forest," Gretel added. The woman chuckled softly. "Yes, yes. You see how the kitchen teaches." Together they placed the shaped loaves into the oven built into the wall. Its door was round, its handle smooth from years of use. Inside, the fire glowed golden, its crackle steady and calm. The old woman sat them on stools nearby. "Now we wait," she said. "For bread to rise, for sweetness to deepen, for courage to find its place." Hansel leaned his head on the table. Gretel folded her hands in her lap. The warmth from the oven washed over them, wrapping them like their cloaks on a winter morning. The old woman hummed, a tune as old as the forest, soft and winding. It matched the crackle of the fire and tea. By the time the bread was ready, the light outside had faded to soft gray. The forest was humming its evening song, crickets beginning their chorus, doves murmuring low, leaves rustling in the cool breeze. The woman set the loaves on the table. Their crusts were golden, their scent filling every corner of the cottage. She sliced pieces, spread them with butter, drizzled them with honey. Hansel took a bite and closed his eyes. "It tastes like home," he whispered. Gretel nodded, crumbs on her lips. "And like safety." The old woman smiled, her wrinkles deepening like the folds of a favorite blanket. "Then my lesson is complete." After supper, she showed them to a small bed tucked in the corner. Its quilt was patchworked with squares of bright colors, each one soft from many washings. The pillows were plump, the sheets smelled faintly of lavender. Hansel and Gretel climbed in, side by side. Their eyelids were heavy, their breaths slow. The old woman tucked the quilt around them with hands that were gentle, though a little shaky. "Rest well, children," she whispered. "The forest has guided you here, and the cottage will keep you safe." Hansel mumbled a thank you, already drifting. Gretel whispered goodnight. The fire crackled softly. The sugar-lined walls gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The forest outside sang its lullaby of leaves and crickets. And in moments, Hansel and Gretel were asleep, their dreams sweet as the honey still warm on their tongues. The next morning came softly. Light slipped through the sugar glass windows in golden ribbons, spreading across the quilt where Hansel and Gretel still slept. The fire had settled into glowing embers, their warmth rising like a sigh. The scent of cinnamon lingered in the air, joined now by the sharper freshness of morning dew drifting in through the cracks. Hansel stirred first. He blinked, stretched, and smiled when he saw the sugar glow on the walls. Gretel rolled onto her side, her hair tumbling like spilled honey, and gave a sleepy giggle. The old woman was already awake. She moved quietly around the kitchen, humming a tune so gentle it felt like an echo of the forest itself. On the table, a bowl of warm milk waited, along with fresh bread from the oven, still steaming faintly. "Good morning, nestlings," she said, her voice creaky but warm. "The forest gave us another day." Hansel and Gretel climbed out of bed, rubbing their eyes, and sat at the table. The old woman poured milk into mugs, spread butter across the bread, and drizzled it with a touch of honey. They ate slowly, savoring every bite. Each mouthful was soft, sweet, and full of the warmth of kindness. After breakfast, the old woman clapped her hands lightly. "The cottage," she said, "is happiest when everyone helps it sing." And so began their day. Hansel carried logs for the hearth, his arms full, his steps careful. Gretel gathered herbs from the garden, whispering thank yous to each sprig of thyme and mint. The old woman stirred a pot at the fire, her spoon moving in slow circles, the steam rising like a lullaby. The work was not hard. It was gentle, steady, like breathing. Each task felt like part of a song, and together the three of them made a melody that floated through the cottage and into the forest beyond. That afternoon, the old woman taught them to bake gingerbread. She showed them how to roll the dough thin, how to press it with wooden molds carved in the shapes of animals, birds, rabbits, deer. She sprinkled cinnamon and sugar, and the air filled with the smell of spice and sweetness. Hansel pressed too hard at first, making the rabbit's ears crooked. He frowned, but the woman chuckled. "Crooked ears can hear the forest better," she said. Gretel's bird came out delicate, its wings perfect. She smiled shyly. The woman kissed her hair. "Careful hands make careful hearts," she whispered. When the cookies baked, the whole cottage glowed with their scent. The three of them sat by the fire, dipping the gingerbread animals into cups of warm milk. Hansel bit the ear from his crooked rabbit. Gretel nibbled the wing from her bird. The old woman smiled and ate a deer, antlers, and all. Later, they stepped outside. The candy cottage gleamed in the afternoon sun, its frosting windows sparkling, its caramel roof warm to the touch. The garden waited beside it, rows of herbs and flowers, vines heavy with beans and peas, patches of carrots nestled in the earth. The old woman bent low, her back stiff, and Hansel quickly offered his hand. Gretel fetched the watering can, filling it at the brook nearby. "Plants," the old woman explained, "are like children. They need water, patience, and a song or two." So they watered the mint, the thyme, the sage. They hummed as they worked, Hansel a steady rhythm, Gretel a lilting tune, the woman a soft hum that wove the two together. The plants seemed to lean toward them, leaves trembling in approval. When the sun lowered, painting the forest gold, they returned inside. The old woman lit candles that smelled faintly of beeswax and honey. She settled in her rocking chair, knitting slowly, the needles clicking like a quiet clock. Hansel and Gretel curled on a rug near the hearth. They built towers from sugar cubes stacked carefully, then knocked them down and laughed softly. The old woman told them stories, not frightening stories, but gentle ones. Stories of how the stars learned to shine, of how the brook first found its voice, of how bread was once only grass until someone thought to grind and bake it. Her voice was like a fire's crackle, steady, warm, filling every corner of the cottage with peace. At last, she guided them back to bed. The quilt smelled of lavender. The pillows welcomed their heads. "Good night, little ones," she whispered, smoothing Gretel's hair, brushing Hansel's brow. "Tomorrow, the cottage will sing again." The forest outside hushed. The crickets sang low. The brook whispered its endless shhh, shhh. And Hansel and Gretel, full of bread, cookies, and kindness, drifted into dreams as sweet as sugar. Days passed in the candy cottage like pages in a favorite book, each one similar, yet each one sweet in its own way. Morning meant warm bread and milk at the table. Afternoon meant helping in the garden or baking cookies shaped like animals. Evening meant stories by the fire, with candlelight flickering and the old woman's voice weaving through the air like a lullaby. Hansel and Gretel felt safe. They felt loved. They felt as if the forest had placed them here as carefully as a parent tucks a quilt around a sleeping child. And yet, one morning, as the sun lifted slowly above the trees, Hansel opened the cottage door and stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky pale blue, and the forest seemed to lean closer, whispering. The breeze rustled the leaves. The brook bubbled more brightly than usual. A dove cooed from a nearby branch. Hansel tilted his head. "The forest is calling," he said softly. Gretel joined him at the doorway. She, too, listened. She, too, felt it, a tug, not harsh, but gentle. Like a thread pulling them toward home. She thought of their parents, father with sawdust on his sleeves, mother singing while she stirred the soup. She pictured the marigolds nodding outside their own cottage door, the mugs with their small painted marks, the path of cobblestones that led back to the village. Her heart stirred. Hansel, she whispered, I miss them. Hansel nodded. He missed them. Inside, the old woman was stirring porridge. She turned when the children stepped back in, their faces thoughtful, their eyes full of longing. She studied them a moment and then smiled sadly, as though she already knew. Children, she said, you have been good guests. You have brought laughter to my kitchen and warmth to my hearth. But I see the forest tugging at your sleeves. Hansel and Gretel looked at one another, then back at her. Gretel's eyes filled with tears. We love it here, she whispered. I know, the woman said gently. And I love that you came. But sweetness is not meant to hold you forever. It is meant to give you strength to return to where you are most needed. Hansel lowered his head. Home. Yes, the woman said. Your home. Your parents' hearts are calling you back, and the forest has carried the message. She led them to the table. On it, she placed a bundle wrapped in a checkered cloth. Inside were small loaves of bread, still warm, a jar of honey sealed tight, and a handful of cookies shaped like stars. For your journey, she said. When you taste these, remember the lessons: patience, kindness, courage. They will carry you farther than any path. She also slipped a sprig of rosemary into Gretel's pocket. For memory, she explained. And into Hansel's hand, she pressed a smooth stone from the brook behind the cottage. For steadiness, she said. The children hugged her, their arms small but full of love. Thank you, Gretel whispered. Thank you for everything, Hansel added. The old woman patted their heads. Thank the forest, she said. It brought you here. It carries you home. Hand in hand, Hansel and Gretel stepped outside. The candy cottage gleamed in the morning sun, its caramel roof golden, its sugar windows bright. The air still smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and honey. But as they walked down the cookie path, the scents grew fainter. The cottage seemed to sigh, as though tucking itself back into the forest's dream. By the time they reached the line of birches, the cottage was hidden behind leaves and light, almost as if it had never been there at all. Still, Hansel and Gretel carried its warmth inside them. They carried its sweetness, its lessons, its love. The forest path stretched ahead, welcoming them back. The trees hummed softly. The brook whispered. The doves cooed. The forest was guiding them, just as it had guided them here. Gretel squeezed Hansel's hand. We'll see the marigolds again soon, she said softly. Hansel nodded. And father's smile. And mother's songs. They walked steadily, not too fast, not too slow. Their baskets swung gently. Their cloaks brushed the moss. Their steps matched the rhythm of the forest, which carried them onward like a lullaby. The day was not over. The story was not over. But home was waiting, and the forest, wise and kind, would see them there. The forest guided Hansel and Gretel gently, as if it knew they had learned all it meant to teach. The trees leaned over the path, their branches whispering, "This way, little ones." Almost there. The brook flowed beside them, its song now brighter, like laughter leading them forward. The breeze carried the scents of pine and moss, but also something faintly familiar, the distant curl of wood smoke, the promise of home. Hansel held the bundle of bread and cookies close. Gretel touched the sprig of rosemary in her pocket, breathing in its sharp, comforting scent. The stone the old woman had given Hansel rested solid in his hand, a reminder of steadiness. They did not hurry. They did not need to. Each step carried them closer, and the forest moved with them, steady as a lullaby. The path widened. The trees grew thinner, letting more and more light spill through. The underbrush softened into meadow grass. Hansel pointed. Look! Gretel followed his finger. There, ahead, were the marigolds, bright and golden, nodding their heads in the breeze as if they had been waiting all this time just to welcome the children back. Their cottage stood beyond, exactly as they remembered. The blue-painted windows. The chimney puffing a gentle ribbon of smoke. The little garden, tidy and green. It looked smaller than the candy cottage, perhaps. Less glittering. Less dreamlike. But to Hansel and Gretel, it looked perfect. It looked like home. The door opened before they could even knock. Mother rushed out, her apron flying, her eyes wide and shining. Father followed, his sleeves still dusted with sawdust, his smile breaking across his face like dawn. Hansel! Gretel! Mother cried, gathering them into her arms. Father bent low and wrapped them all together, his strong hands trembling with relief. The children laughed and clung tightly, their hearts swelling with joy. The warmth of home, the love of parents, the safety of arms that had missed them, it was sweeter than any sugar, stronger than any spice. When at last they stepped inside, Hansel set the bundle on the table. Out came the bread, the honey, the cookies shaped like stars. These are from a kind woman in the forest, Gretel explained. She taught us patience, kindness, and courage. Mother pressed a hand to her heart. Father nodded slowly, his eyes shining. Then the forest has given you more than food, he said. It has given you wisdom. They ate together, breaking the bread, drizzling the honey, sharing the star cookies. Every bite was full of love and memory. The cottage seemed to hum with happiness, the marigolds nodded outside the window, and the forest sang faintly in the distance, proud of its little travelers. That evening, when the stars climbed high into the sky and the moon poured silver light across the meadow, Hansel and Gretel lay in their own beds once more. Their mugs sat on the shelf, their cloaks hung by the door, their parents' voices drifted softly from the other room. Hansel held the smooth stone in his hand, feeling its quiet strength. Gretel tucked the sprig of rosemary under her pillow, breathing its gentle scent. They whispered to each other before sleep took them. Patience. Kindness. Courage. The words felt like magic, the kind that does not vanish when the story ends, but stays with you always. Hansel and Gretel closed their eyes. The forest rested. The cottage glowed. Their parents' love wrapped around them like the softest quilt. And soon, the whole house breathed in rhythm with their sleep, steady, safe, and full of dreams as sweet as sugar. The end. Crescent moon sparkles.